Good evening and welcome to the ninth episode of Leadership Conversations in the Development Sector. The social impact sector is full of passionate leaders with innovative outlooks on the world's greatest problems. Our leadership conversations focus on the unique insights offered by these leaders as they share their experiences and move the development sector forward. Our host, Go Barefoot, is an interactive web portal dedicated to the social sector. It brings together individuals, NGOs, NPOs, and the CSR arms of organizations with the mandate of creating a one-stop information website for both networking and knowledge sharing. We are supported by Catalyst, an NGO which has been preparing young women for leadership roles to create equality in opportunities and bridge the gender gap. Also, we are supported by Third Sector Partners, India's only executive search firm exclusively for the development sector. Our guest today is one of the leading lights in the development sector. I would like to extend a warm welcome to Amitabh Behar, Chief Executive Officer, Oxfam India. Amitabh Behar is the CEO of Oxfam India since 2018. He was the Executive Director of the National Foundation for India. He was served as the convener of National Social Watch Coalition and was the co-chair of the Global Call to Action Against Poverty, a network of over 11,000 civil society organizations. And for 5 years was the convener of the Vada Na Todo Abhiyan in India. Amitabh's areas of interest are governance and civil society. Over the years, he has worked on issues promoting governance, accountability, and social action. He's one of the leading experts of people-centered advocacy and was the executive director of the National Center of Advocacy Studies. He sits on several organizational boards, including Center for Budget and Governance Accountability, Navsarjan, Mobile Crèches, Civics, World Alliance for Citizens Participation, and Global Fund for Community Foundation. He's also the president of YUVA. In conversation with Mr. Amitabh is Shital Mehra, leadership expert and executive presence coach for CEOs. Shital has trained over 75,000 professionals across Asia and has personally coached over 1,000 CXOs in the past 2 decades. She has conducted workshops for diverse organizations across Asia and has been invited as a speaker by leading B schools and professional associations. She's a best-selling author, and her latest best-selling book, Executive Presence, The Poise Formula for Leadership, is India's first research-based formula on this leadership skill. Shital is an active philanthropist and social entrepreneur. Thank you, Shital and Amitabh, for joining us today. Now I would like to hand it over to you, Shital. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakshi. Thank you, and welcome, Amitabh. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you here, and we look forward to hearing your views on leadership. So I'm going to very quickly start by asking you that the development sector has significantly changed and evolved in the last couple of decades. So how has leadership evolved to rise up to this very difficult challenge?
So thank you, Shital. And let me first thank Go Barefoot, Catalyst, and Third Sector Partner for inviting me. Delighted to be here. I must say that this is certainly a very, very interesting initiative. It would be fantastic to hear eventually multiple voices and try and paint a picture of what's happening in the country, because ultimately different shades will give us the real picture. So thank you for doing this, and I'm looking forward to your eventually bringing together the different conversations you're doing. Coming back to the question that you're asking, let me say that I'll try and respond to it in three parts. The first is that India has evolved dramatically or changed dramatically in the last 15 years. And that those changes range from, for the first few years of those 15 years, getting 10+% GDP growth, absolutely phenomenal, to looking at how we now have technology changing lives. That's happening globally, but certainly in India. To looking at the demography changing, where we've been saying that these are the 15 years where we now are moving towards the demographic dividend of now having more young people than the older people. And also politics has changed dramatically in the last few years. It's become way more bitter and divisive in many ways. So India is under huge transformation. And this transformation then does get reflected in how the sector, so that's part B of what I wanted to say in response to this question, is that the sector has also gone through dramatic changes. So now this is not a sector which can be defined by a group of either not-for-profits, which we in India call the NGOs, or local community groups. These were broadly the two kinds of groups in the sector. But now there's been, a phenomenal explosion of all kinds. So groups which are now talking about social impact, to groups which are looking at, say, producers, cooperatives, to now you also have, on the other hand, so these are the more structured one, you also have, on the other hand, big ones like citizens movements. So whether it was the anti-corruption movement, the Nirbhaya movement, at the moment the farmers' protest, all this is broadly in the same space that we are looking at. So this sector is also changing so much that, I just wanted to say that how has the leadership responded to these changes is going to be difficult to give you one blanket response. But let me now, having given the context, let me say that I do feel disappointed. The leadership has not risen up to the challenges that we have. There is a sense of drift. And I would actually say that the leadership has not been able to cope with the changed reality. So obviously, some geniuses here and there are not the story, but largely the leadership is still trying to cope with, say, on the one hand, the onslaught of the market into the sector, which was not happening earlier. On the other hand, the politics, where the civil society space itself is shrinking. And on the other hand, reduced number of people joining the sector who are joining for passion and change, but who are also professionals. So I think there's a sense of drift. This is an inflection point, and we need to, get our game together to change the mood at the moment. So I'm at the moment somber.
Interesting, very interesting, and very honest answer. Okay, so I'm just going to shift gears, and the divide between the corporate and social sector is breaking. So what are some of the things that the social sector can learn from the corporate sector? Some systems or processes or anything else that they can pick up, and of course vice versa.
So there's so much to learn from actors outside your own world. So that is the humility that is absolutely non-negotiable for this sector. If the sector becomes arrogant in saying we know the answers, I think that's the death of this sector, and probably any entity. So we need to learn. And from the corporate sector, we can learn so much, just starting with how they use technology, how they leverage technology for the results that they want, or the way the systems and processes are developed in the corporate sector, which are hugely helpful. As while I run Oxfam, I do understand that if you are trying to reach a very large number of individuals and engage with them in seeking their support, you do need those systems and processes which are able to get that 100 rupees, which is so important for me and so important for that person who's giving that 100 rupees on a monthly basis to us. And that cannot happen just through my passion. You need to develop those systems. Somebody has to collect. You have the banking system, etc. Keeping in touch with them. So it's a phenomenal amount of learning that we need to do from the sector. But vice versa, I would say, and I'm grateful that you're asking that, Shital. Very often people just think that the corporate sector needs to educate the development sector. But I think that they also can learn so much in these moments, as in we are just starting the COP at the moment. The climate crisis is telling us that this economic model cannot work. The way the corporates run after profits is not going to work. As in, a lot of them have changed their taglines and they say that we believe in profit, people, and planet. But that's still a lot of rhetoric. So how do they bring people to the center of whatever they do is going to be central I would say, looking at our future. If we are looking at a sustainable future, the corporates need to learn this human-centeredness as one of their fundamental design principles.
Superb. So humility and scalability, and of course, climate change, which you're very passionate about and have spoken extensively at various forums. Okay, I'm just going to continue on the same thread. COVID, of course, was a life-changing event, and it was the first time that we saw that the government, the corporate, and the development all had to collaborate on every parameter, whether it was a vaccination drive or awareness building or masks or anything. So, what are your views on this collaboration, which we had actually seen for the first time at that scale?
Sure. No, Shital, that's fantastic. I firmly believe, and the climate crisis, because we're talking about it, tells us again and again that we cannot have frameworks of competition guiding us. It has to be a collaborative framework. There's absolutely no doubt about it. As in, if we are going to change the world, it is going to be through collaboration. And those collaborations need to go way beyond just within the sector. So it's not just about Oxfam collaborating with, say, Save the Children and UNICEF. It is, as you said, us collaborating with certain corporate entities, which then is collaborating with the state, essentially the government. And I do think during COVID, we were able to deliver something which was, it is probably the most difficult crisis our generation has seen. It's a crisis in 100 years, heart-wrenching scenes we've all seen. So in that, I think we all came together and did our small bits, our big bits, and it has probably in some ways tempered the tragedy that could have been. And the work we were doing, let's say during the first wave of just providing food, right. People were walking back, but it had to be done with government, getting permissions from them. So I would say that collaboration has to be the fundamental principle. However, let me also say that there are certain roles that we are supposed to play.
So we have seen a triangular collaboration. Yeah.
Yes, Shital. So we have seen triangular collaboration, which is fantastic. But I was just going further. I was saying that ultimately we also have our roles. So it's great to collaborate. But as the development sector, it is our role also to hold governments accountable, to hold the corporate world accountable.
Yeah.
So that's also something that we must continue doing. Collaboration does not mean that you do not then ask tough questions of power.
Superb. That's a very nice way to put it. And yes, we should continue to ask tough questions from the corporate as well as the government sector. Now, just changing gears a bit, technology, of course, has been a big game changer. And how has technology impacted this sector in the last decade, possibly more so in the last 18 months?
Yeah. So, Shita, I think technology is changing the way we function, as in it's probably changing even our DNA. so society is getting changed dramatically because of technology. So the sector has also been changing due to technology and with technology. But let me just say that, one of the things that we need to recognize that in India, the digital divide is still massive. We did a survey on education just a few months ago, post-COVID. And, I don't remember the exact number, but it is something like 12 to 15% of the rural population has access either to a computer or to a smartphone. So 85% children had no access to digital classes. And that's the reality of this country. So while technology is a huge enabler, but I think it's also for our sector, it's important to constantly underscore that there is a digital divide. There's a justice question involved in technology. So that's where I would say our role is that while we use technology, how do we ensure that technology delivers for the last person, for the poorest of the poor? Because even within families, when you say the poor family has a smartphone, it's usually the man who's earning who will hold the phone. Otherwise, it's the young boy who gets the phone. The girls are not going to get access to the phone. The old woman in the house is certainly not going to get access. So that's a question we bring up front. But technology has immense possibilities. From just look at how digitization can give access to health and education, even to very, very difficult problems like land records. I know of places where land records, which were one of the most difficult records kept by the government, are getting digitized and changing the lives of citizens. So it's something that we need to, again, be cognizant of the immense possibility it provides, but also be cognizant that how technology can actually further accentuate inequality. And we must keep that in mind.
Yeah, all the cultural biases then creep out, and finally, when the resources are in short supply, then who gets those resources? And that's where culture plays a very important role. I agree, it can be quite a game changer. It has definitely led to transparency, as you mentioned, in land records, which is a phenomenal thing, especially even at the lowest level. So yes, it has, but there's lots more to be done. I agree with you completely. You had written an excellent article, which I enjoyed, on the corporatization of non-profit boards. And you are very passionate about better governance. So could you share some practices which will ensure better governance in the development sector?
Sure. So, because you're giving me an entry point through my article, I'm tempted to go back to what I say in the article, that what one should not do, and let me start from there, because that's part of good governance, I think, in our sector, is that blindly following the corporate good governance model, because their model of functioning is built on very different principles and for different objectives. For instance, let me just take the question. I know this is a difficult one, but just to explain the question of conflict of interest. So if you have a board member, and if the person has anything to do in a corporate world, anything to do where your business chain interacts with that person's stakes, you would want to declare it and not get into it, which is right, because you're trying to look at conflict of interest. But for instance, if in the not-for-profit sector, you have a board member who also works in the same arena, then is it not good to collaborate? You can't say that because I work on issues of gender justice and I have a board member and she or he does fantastic work on gender justice, but I'll not touch your organization because you're on my board. This is not going to work. So we need to have our own approaches. And I think the fundamental point is that it has to be built around our values. And those should be at the center. The second, I would say, is that we need to move out of this, the size obsession, size in terms of, we have reached now 5 crore, we are a 5 crore organization, we are a 10 crore organization. I think that's not really important. So governance is also about, in the development sector, keeping organizations rooted to their core vision and mission. I think that's very, very central. Otherwise, you can get caught in saying, okay, I need to get 5 more projects, 10 more projects, and I'm from 30 people now, we are 150 people, we are one of the best large organizations. I think the board's job is to remind us, are you really making a difference in the last person's life? Because that's why you exist. Yeah. So those are a couple of thoughts on, but this can be a very, very long conversation.
Interesting, but good. You shared some snapshots. Now, of course, leadership in the development sector, you have observed it, and in the first question itself, you had mentioned that, it's not possibly up to the mark and can be much better. So what are some of the shortcomings that you see in today's leaders in the development sector?
So I would say the first one is passion. It is missing. When I started working, I did meet a lot of leaders who were probably way more passionate than the leadership now. They believed that another world is possible. They believe that a just world is possible, an equal world is possible. So I would say that the first one is passion, because without passion, how do you change? How do you move something as mammoth as the issues that we are trying to engage with? The second, I would say, is what is again critical is our ability to walk the talk. We are a group, a sector which talks about a lot of values, but our ability to walk that talk is limited. So it's tough, but we need to do that. Without that, I think the authenticity that's needed for the external world, the credibility that's needed for the external world to take us seriously and to get influenced by us is again limited. So the Gandhian principle of be the change you want, I think it's very, very important. The third, I think, so yeah, let me just say one more and then
You can say as many.
Okay, no, I thought you were giving me a cue that you wanted to move on to the next one. So,
no, we want to hear about leadership. We want to hear about talent.
Okay, so the third that I wanted to say is people do need to recognize that this sector, the primary idea of this sector is to work with communities. I think that's also very important. And all of us make mistakes. And let me say that I led this group called National Center for Advocacy Studies, and I have been doing trainings on how to do advocacy over the years. But sometimes I do believe that people, at least in this sector, the leadership needs to recognize that advocacy, campaigning, communication are add-ons, but the primary power comes from working with people. So you cannot say that I can change society by sitting in Delhi and going to the India Habitat Center or to the South Block and believe that I can make change happen. That's not going to happen.
You have to work with the people.
You have to work with the people. I'll feel happy. I'll go to the Noida TV rooms, from there to the South Block and to the India Habitat Center. You start feeling that you've created your own world. But it is about working with the people, and that has to be very, very central. And then I would say that a high level of humility is very important in our sector, where we need to constantly learn from others and also recognize, and that's something which I keep repeating to all my friends who come from the corporate world, that social change is not an assembly line. You do not, you cannot design it that you'll immediately get the changes. It's not going to happen. So that humility of understanding that it's going to be a very, very dynamic world. And given that you gave me time, so let me just say one more, and that is courage. I think that's the one which is missing the most at the moment. Change is not going to happen without paying a price. As we know, just look at a household. A woman who's going to challenge her husband is in a very patriarchal society, is going to, be bullied by the husband, harassed by the husband, but she needs that courage to challenge that unequal relationship. And that's what we need to do. We'll need to do that. We'll get bullied sometimes by the government, by the donors, by the rich, but we need to stand by our principles, have the courage and conviction that what we are doing is right, and continue doing it. Yeah.
Superb. Your organization and you, of course, leading the organization, have to help develop potential leaders. So what are some of the practices that you've adopted? We have a lot of young professionals in our audience who would love to know that how have you developed young leaders or developed your team?
So, I do personally believe that entities like Oxfam can only play a support role. Again, as in just going with the thread of being humble, I do really believe that we can only be supportive in this journey. And there are probably many others who do that, of building leadership. We can support that. But we have done that, I would say, reasonably well over the last 60, 70 years in India. We've been in India since 52. And I think we've done a good job. And it has worked by identifying the right people. I think that's very, very critical. And investing in them, both financial resources, ideas, trainings, networks. These are all different ways of strengthening capacity without, I would say, short project timeframes. So leadership is about walking together. It's giving solidarity, but also then letting people learn with their own experience. Learning by doing is something what we have done. So, over the years, at no point of time, Oxfam would have had less than 80 to 100 partners. And we would say that these partners are on, say, right to education, right to health, gender justice, which I would say was the issue on which we partnered. But one of the primary objectives was to build leadership in Indian civil society. And it has worked well. Just to say, my personal experience before I joined Oxfam, for years I've been, I keep traveling, and particularly Central India is an area where I've traveled a lot. And wherever I would go, whether it is Jabalpur or to Raipur or to Mandla, the parts of Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Nagpur, I would meet organizations and they would say, Oxfam supported us 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And I had no link then with Oxfam. So I think Oxfam has done a good job, but this has been the trajectory of doing with humility, support long-term, invest in ideas, individuals and institutions, not in projects or not demand outcomes. So it's really a true partnership that I think builds leadership.
And tremendous patience in building the.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You will know it
so
better.
interesting.
You will know it better than us. That's your full-time preoccupation. So
yes.
Patience, you're right, is so critical.
True. Very true. So my final question to you is, how do you feel, Amitabh? What do you feel will leadership in the development sector look like in the post-COVID era? So some of the big changes or small changes that you predict that we will see in the sector.
I really won't say that it's because of COVID, but the sector is changing dramatically. And as I said, we are at an inflection point. And it's difficult to predict what is it going to emerge. But I do think that we will see, this is the optimistic side of me, that we will see tremendous leadership now coming from citizens who will become part of this sector. So in some ways, going back to what was happening during the national movement, that you also have a lawyer who does his or her work on a daily basis, but then provides leadership. So that's my feeling, that the current not-for-profit sector will move slightly into support roles, which is very important. but you'll see a new leadership emerging of citizens, of passionate change makers who would say that anything below 100% justice is non-negotiable, and they'll go for it. I'm very confident.
Sounds very positive, very exciting, and we are looking forward to an era where citizens take on leadership, and development sector moves to the support role, and so does the corporate and the government. So it's going to, yes, that's wonderful. We have questions from the audience, and we have a question that's come in from Purvi Shah. So could we have the spotlight on Purvi, please?
Yeah, hi Amitabh. It was a lovely and enriching discussion. Thank you for that. My question, because I have vested interest in women leadership development, is about how do we harness their inner talent and self-belief to build more women leaders, to build leadership in these women?
Okay. So that's a tough one. I think that's something which Shital should take. But from my side, thank you, Purvi. What I would say is that we have a fairly interesting program which you would like. You must engage with it, where we're essentially saying that our experience over the decades has taught us that, particularly on gender justice, we initially started with asking for change of laws. Then we started asking for change of policies. Then we said policies need to be implemented better, which are all very, very critical. But what we have realized is that the gendered social norms continue. The patriarchal norms are going to continue. You can have the best of the inheritance laws, but if you don't make changes in the social norms, it's not going to change. So that's where we have started focusing, and therefore an appreciation and understanding, particularly on the leadership around feminist principles. We work with that. It's very important for people to recognize how patriarchy functions and how it has actually gendered all social norms, and certainly, yes, economic systems and political systems. So that's very critical for letting people bring out their inner leaders, because it is a social structure which is stopping them. I think that would be an additional piece that I can talk of. And then obviously there are other ways of looking at each individual is different. How do you work with them? But this whole thing of just going to a village and working with women that, okay, young girls that play football, or the idea of mobility. These are such transformative ideas for them that their inner leadership does come out if you're able to create that enabling environment. So it is about, I do believe we need to collectively smash patriarchy, and then we can really, look at this.
Absolutely, yeah, resonate with that. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question that's come in from Yashi. So could we have the spotlight on Yashi, please?
Right. Thank you, Shital, for this conversation. And Amitabh, it's been lovely hearing you this evening. So the question that I have is, how have the approaches for engagement deployed by civil society leaders changed over time, say in rural and urban contexts?
So engagement with communities or with
communities and the government.
Okay. So, I would say that with the government, this is a piece that I academically track. So Shital would not want me to start a 10-minute discourse on it. But what I would say with government, we have different phases in this country. So till the 70s, I think we were pretty much working because we were still continuing with the momentum of the national movement. We were working very closely with the government, and there was very little work happening outside the government, which is more like, Vinoba Bhave was doing it. These were called Sarvodayis. After 70s, we then started again saying that this is not delivering the change we want. And then we have had different trajectories. And I would say it's a full range with the government, the engagement. There are groups which completely oppose the government, and I think that's legitimate. There are groups which say that, okay, let's oppose partially the government, but also try and work with them. And then there are groups which work in partnership. I think that's the beauty of civil society. In fact, as an advocacy person, I keep saying that you need to weave together these different ones. None of them can achieve victory on their own. It's about from opposition to partnership, get the entire spectrum together, and you will achieve the change that you're looking at. So that's with the government. But with the community, I would say there have been very different approaches. And it's tough to say there's one approach. There have been approaches of charity, that, oh, it's I am privileged and I need to give them food, to approaches of camaraderie, where people actually go and say that we need to live with the communities. We need to unlearn what we have learned and learn from the communities, because they have so much wisdom, and they will then tell us how the change is going to happen. I just become part of that change. Two people also having the approach of bringing in certain skills and then working with communities. So I would say the range is massive. Sometimes it is about a very patronizing approach, which I find hugely problematic. Sometimes it is about working as comrades, which I think is important. But we need to recognize the spaces where we come from. There is a specific strength that I bring in, and I must use that. So I would really say that ultimately the approach is about, with complete respect, have a common vision, and then work together with respective roles for it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for this insight.
So comprehensive in the answer. Do we have any questions in the chat box? We'll circle back to Sakshi and Anushka if there's any questions.
Yes, Shital, actually there is one question.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the question is, as an organization gets larger, there can be a tendency for the institution to dampen the inspiration. How can one leader, keep this from happening?
These are all questions actually for Shital. These are not questions for me, because she does constantly think about this. And Shital, thank you so much. I've got your books also, so I'm going to read them now. So thank you for sharing your books. But you're absolutely right. Once the organization becomes bigger, the organization, for very good reasons, starts moving away from individuals to focusing on processes and systems. And that's, there's no other way. You can't run an organization even of 50 people just based on individual relationship. That's not going to happen. But how do you maintain the inspiration is a challenge for all of us. And that's where, what I was saying earlier, that how passionate the leader is. Is the leader willing to walk the talk? Does the leadership demonstrate courage? Is it very clear that the leadership is deeply committed to the vision and mission, and not to other say objectives? For instance, like I was saying, how big my organization is, what is the influence I have? That will keep the inspiration going. And then there are some standard ways of doing it. I do believe that it's about requesting people. We are a large organization, but asking them to actually go and take part in action, where real social action is happening. Just go there, it completely changes. As in one day of, for the last 30 years, I've been going to the field regularly. But every time I go, every time I come back energized, physically tired, but mentally energized. So I think it's just about ensuring that you also adhere to those processes, that people do go to the field, do get, not bogged down by processes, but actually doing social action, which is our role.
Wonderful. Thank you. And, we have run out of time, but we have not run out of questions, and we would love to hear some more from you. but we have to stop. And thank you, Amitabh. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your inputs. I'm sure our audience have enjoyed, and it's wonderful to have you here. And thank you and goodbye, and wishing all our listeners a very happy Diwali and a wonderful year ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you.